This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we have a very special guest, and I'm so excited to introduce her. For the last 60 years, she has been on the scene, gracing us with her song and beauty. Now, she's worked with great artists like Quincy Jones, Pearl Bailey, Duke Ellington, Sammy Davis Jr., other artists like Billy Eckstine, and as well Lionel Hampton. Now, in addition to her music career, she is also a fantastic actress who's worked in television and film. Please welcome to our show the legendary Miss Freda Payne.
Hi,
How
how
you
are you?
doing? Good, good. Thanks so much for joining us. I got to thank Josh for helping to set things up. Spoke with him the other day, and he put us in touch. And you and I spoke on the phone the other day. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview on short notice. And by the way, I love the concert that you guys put on a few days ago at your house, you and Josh. That was
Oh
really
yeah,
nice. Yeah,
that was fun.
yeah, that was really, really nice. Well, Frida, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, you've been in the music world for quite a long time, and everyone knows you. Now, we understand that you're originally from Detroit, Michigan. Tell me
Uh,
a little bit about your humble beginnings, coming up. First thing that I think of actually when I think of Detroit is, of course, Motown, and also another lady who came up with you, Miss Aretha Franklin. I think you guys are like came up at the same time. But tell us about your humble beginnings and how you got involved in music.
okay. Well, my humble beginnings, it goes back to me being a little girl and being really shy.
Yeah.
And let's say we lived on the east side, and then we moved to the west side, like about when I was 7.
Ah.
And and then my sister and I both, we had piano. My mother used to give us piano lessons and all
Mm.
like that. I wasn't singing at all back, during that period. I was a real shy person
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
very, very shy, kind of withdrawn. But I was athletic and I was like a
Hmm.
little bit of a tomboy.
Okay.
So I had a good childhood
Good.
in
Good.
that respect. And then my piano teacher one day when I was 12,
Hmm.
she said, Frida, our forthcoming recital, I'm going to put together an ensemble group of 6 people, and I would like you to be in it, but I want to test your voice to see if your voice is good enough.
Mm.
And so she heard me sing and she tested, and she said, well, you have a beautiful voice. She says, I thought Sherry was the only one that was the singer in the family, but you can sing too. She says, I want you to do a solo. And so she had me do a solo, and my mother's friends all gathered around and started to oh,
Oh, you're
somebody's calling
something.
me. I got a decline right now. Okay. All right. So uh anyway, one thing led to another, and I started, accepting invitations to sing
Yeah.
around Detroit, like different affair, a banquet, a tea,
Hmm.
talent contest. I started to enter talent contests, and I would sometimes I'd win, sometimes I would come in first, sometimes I come in second.
Yeah.
And then I decided to audition for a talent contest that was on TV, and it was a TV show called Ed McKenzie's Dance Hour.
Okay.
And I got on that. It was like Dick Clark's American Bandstand. It was
Hmm.
just like that, only it was Detroit. And
Mm.
they came on every Saturday afternoon, and they always featured a headliner like Sammy Davis Jr. or Della Reese or the Four Freshmen,
Right.
people like that.
Yeah.
And then they had a segment that was strictly dedicated to 4 contestants competing to win the contest. And I won. And so
Mm.
And the funny thing is, when I auditioned for it, I really auditioned to be a dancer. I wanted to dance because I studied ballet and modern dancing, and I
Hmm.
wanted to be a dancer. And then something clicked in my head and said, I actually won the audition to be a dancer. And when I got home, I said, Mama, you know what? I think I want to sing instead. And so
Mm.
she called them up and they had me come back down and I sang and they said, okay, you can sing. Well, I won the contest.
You go,
And
girl.
then 6 months later, they called me back to do it again. And I
Right.
won again. I won again. And one
Amazing.
of those appearances, Sammy Davis was the headliner was the
Hmm.
star because he was working at the Elmwood Casino, which
Yeah.
was over in Windsor. You know, Windsor's just across the river.
Right.
And so, matter of fact, we took a picture together. I was 13, and in
Wow.
the picture you can see I tower over him.
Yeah, he's very short. Yeah.
And I'm not really that tall, to tell you the truth. But anyway, it was wonderful. And years later, I had the pleasure, years later, after my career really blossomed, I had the pleasure of working with him on several occasions,
Hmm.
yes, his opening act. And that was one of my thrills. I did that. And then I got to audition for Duke Ellington himself, and he played for me. Uh, this was at the Gotham Hotel in Detroit. I was
Hmm.
17.
Now,
And
Frida, didn't he say you reminded him of Lena Horne?
yes, he did. That's what he said when I finished singing. He
Mm.
turned around and he looked at me. He said, "You know what? You remind me of Lena Horne." He says, "I want to hear you sing with the band."
Right.
He said, "The only problem is that we're leaving tomorrow morning to go to Pittsburgh. We have a gig, an engagement at the Holiday House there.
Hmm.
And if you can get someone, your mother or somebody, to drive you to Pittsburgh, I'd be very happy to invite you up to sing with the band. I want to hear you sing with the band." So that
Wow.
did happen. That happened. And it was my mother and my mentor. His name was Mac Ferguson, and he was my mentor. He was a pianist, and he played mostly all the standards, and he's the one that really kind of like taught me about a lot about the basics of show business.
Yeah.
And so I got to get to drive up there. We all went up there and stayed at the Holiday House, and Duke Ellington invited me up on stage, and I sang with
Mm.
the band.
Wow.
And then the next afternoon, uh, he invited me. He said, "Come, come by. I want to speak with you before you guys leave." And and he said, "Wait a minute. I want you to meet somebody." And so we started walking. We went outside, and it was like a courtyard, and there
Hmm.
was a man coming towards us, and he had glasses on and was smiling. And he said, "Freda, I want you to meet Billy Strayhorn." And
Wow.
so I got to meet Billy Strayhorn. I didn't know, I had heard his name. I had heard of him because he's the guy that wrote A Train. And
Hmm.
he also wrote a great ballad, a jazz standard, Lush
Hmm.
Life,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is one of my favorite songs, by the way. And I do that as well. Um, but that was something that I remember, and that was a wonderful memory. And
Wow.
so, also not connected to jazz, but I was Berry Gordy's first female protege.
Yeah. Now, didn't you
Uh,
say there were some contract issues or problems why you guys were not able to really work
that
together?
was the only thing that stood in the way. He would
Wow.
not give in to anybody changing anything in his contract or what he wanted.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that's, I'm sorry to say, but I love Barry. He's like, we're like family anyway, but
Right.
because we all from the same pot.
Exactly. Exactly.
And even the Gordys and my family, we all went to the same church back in Detroit, Bethel
Hmm.
AME. And
Hmm.
my mother knew his parents. My mother, used to work in their grocery store when she was a teenager. So
Wow.
it was like one of those things where, let's say, everybody knew everybody. uh
Interesting.
that just wasn't meant to be. So,
Now let's
and
go
here
back.
I am back singing jazz again.
I know. Well, I've always said to people, hear your song, Band of Gold. And I says, if you really listen to Freda Payne, she's actually a jazz singer who happens to sing pop, not the other way around. But let's go back a little bit. During your teenage years, I guess you were doing jingles and commercials and little things like
Hmm.
that. Now, how did you get to work with Pearl Bailey?
Well, this also was happening when I was 17.
Wow.
I had just graduated from high school when I was 16 in
Really?
June. Yeah.
Okay.
And then my birthday is in September,
Hmm.
September the 19th. So
Hmm.
uh, I got a chance to audition for Pearl Bailey. And how that came about is we had a neighbor, a friend of ours, who was really good friends with my parents, and His
Yeah.
name was Alan Early Jr. He was an attorney, a criminal attorney in Detroit, and a very good one, by the way.
Okay.
So Alan happened to meet Pearl Bailey's road manager, a guy by the name of Bob Bailey.
Bob Bailey.
He was no relation to Pearl, but his name just happened, Bob Bailey. And Bob met Alan at a cocktail party.
Mm-hmm.
And so Alan started telling him about me, because what happened was Bob said, you know what? One of our singers, one of the background singers, is leaving, or I guess they quit, or they just left the show. Because she had a review and she was on tour, and she was at a theater in Detroit at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we're holding an audition to hire a new background singer. So Alan said, well, wait, I have somebody that might be perfect for you. You should let her audition. He said, she's only 17 and she just graduated from high school, but she's a terrific singer. So I went to the audition, not really even thinking I would get it, because everybody there that auditioned, they were all professionals.
Right.
I was the only one that was like, kind of just getting started, although I had been doing commercials, prior to that.
Yeah.
And so I auditioned, and matter of fact, it was a double audition. It was an audition to sing and an audition to dance as a chorine. And this was for something they were going to do at the Moulin Rouge in Las Vegas, which was a Black-owned casino in Las Vegas at the time. And so I won for both auditions. So what happened was it was like 2 days later, I was on the bus. I was on the bus and we were going to Cincinnati. That was the next stop.
Wow, that's so amazing. Now, tell me about this 10-year contract that Duke Ellington sent you, and your mom, forbid it because, you would have been locked in this thing, and it probably didn't give you an opportunity maybe to do other things. But tell us about that, a 10-year contract.
Yeah, he mailed a 10-year contract for me to be his band singer, and it was for 10 years.
Wow.
And the salary was really low. I don't know if I want to mention what it was, but anyway, it was low, but after all, I was just starting out, so I guess he figured he didn't have to pay me thousands of dollars or anything like that.
Right.
And so 10 years. So the first thing that Alan said was, you know what, this surpasses your 21st birthday. And he said, you're going to have to get a legal guardian to go with you because you're underage already, and that would have been my mother. And he said, we should there's some little adjustments I'd like to suggest.
Right.
As looking out for you, because he was a neighbor. He wasn't even charging us, for his services.
Right.
And so he said, okay, that, and then my mother, when she spoke with Duke, she says, Mr. Ellington, if let's say this is a 10-year contract, let's say that in about 4 to 5 years, you've made my daughter a big star and she's commanding or getting thousands of dollars for her engagements. Would you thereby adjust your salary or give her more money, other than what's specified in the contract? He said no. He said no. And I was like, and we went back and forth. And then we just both, it was mutual. He said, you know what? I love Freda. He said, but let's just forget it, because he wasn't into all that, bickering, going back and forth. So I guess some people are like that,
You're blessed also to have a wonderful mother who really guided you. She probably knew what was best for you and it helped you. But I'm interested in finding out how you got a chance to work with Quincy Jones, because you were like his protege.
Yeah, I was. That's another story. I was in New York. I went to New York when I was 18.
Right.
And I happened to meet Quincy this was at a restaurant, Black-owned restaurant in Manhattan on 48th Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue. And it was called Sapphires.
Okay.
It was owned by a guy by the name of Danny Sims.
Danny Sims, okay.
Now, Danny had, became infamous in that he was a businessman, restaurant owner, he wound up marrying Beverly Johnson, and
Oh, yeah,
he also managed Johnny Nash. Remember Johnny Nash? I can see
I do. I
clearly
do.
now.
Yeah.
The
I do.
rain has come. And I knew Johnny Nash back during those days as well. But
Okay.
he's long gone. He quit the business many years ago. And
Yeah.
then Danny also was managing Bob Marley. He was
Really?
involved in, but this was a few years later. But
Oh, wow.
anyway, going back to Danny and Sapphires, Quincy was appearing at Basin Street East with his big band. And he was with a guy who was in the band named Jerome Richardson. And they came to Sapphires, after the show, I guess to have something to eat or whatever. And, because Danny also featured soul food. And I don't think he'd get that at Basin Street East.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's Danny introduced me to Quincy, and I gave him my phone number, and then he called me, I think the next night, and invited me to come and see the show at Basin Street East. And
Yeah.
then I think after that we went to an after hours, a little club, and
Hmm.
he said, "Why don't you get up and sing?" Because he hadn't heard me sing, and I got up and I sang, "If I Were a Bell."
Mm.
Right. But about a few months later, this was after I recorded an album, my very first album on Impulse, and that was in 1962, going into 63.
Was that Under the Lights Have Gone Down and Much More?
After the lights go down low and much more, that was
That
on
is that. Can I
Impulse.
tell you something? I think that that is one of your best recordings. Your debut album was one of your very best. I thought it was.
Really?
Oh yeah, without question. Because like I said, when you're singing jazz, you just stretch out. It really people get an opportunity to hear what Freda Payne really sounds like. We have these discussions all the time about Band of Gold and some of your other
Yeah.
stuff. But I'm like, when you're doing jazz, that's you at your best. And I was so surprised at such a young age. You were just so powerful, and that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about. Growing up, you were listening to Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, but it was something about Ella Fitzgerald that really just, something about her that captured you. And from there,
Yes.
I think what was it about Ella that really, really got you? Because, like I said, there were so many great singers during that time, but she was special in your life.
Ella was special because when I heard her sing on the radio, it just perked up. My ears just perked up. And
Yeah.
I said, now that's a real singer. But you
Mm,
know who I was listening to? Like, I'd be in my room at night. This was when I'm talking about, I was like 14 and 15 and 16 years old. And I'd have a radio. The radio was right above my bed. I
yeah.
had like a twin bed, and it was the radio. And I went, you know, my I'd have the lights out, but I'd have the radio on and have it turned down real low, and
Hmm.
they'd be playing people like Miles Davis, Chet Baker,
Wow.
uh, Chris Connor, Sarah Vaughan, Betty Bebop Carter,
Hmm.
uh, and then they play some Ella. And that was, that music turned me on. That's what ignited my interest in becoming a singer
Hmm.
and a jazz singer at that. And I just, well, I had recorded this album. It was in 62. It was released in 63. And Quincy had heard about the album.
Yeah.
So he called me when he was booked to go into the Apollo with Billy Eckstine headlining.
Billy Eckstine. Wow.
And Red Fox was the comedian, and Coles and Atkins, Honey Coles and Charlie Atkins.
Yeah.
Charlie became the main choreographer for the Temptations, and Four Tops went over at Motown years after that. But
Mm.
they were on the show, and then Quincy invited me to be on the bill with them, and
Wow.
I was the band singer. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then
Amazing.
a year later, the following year, they were invited to come back again, and he called me to do it again. So that's how I got to work with
It's
Quincy.
incredible. Now, what about Lionel Hampton? You worked with him too, didn't you?
Yeah, I worked with him.
Wow.
and we did some dates on the East Coast, like
Hmm.
college dates,
Yeah.
and I'd be on the bus, you know, uh, and then I worked with him in Vegas at the same hotel and the lounge where Duke was appearing back, when I was 17. And
17.
that was the Riviera Hotel. And I worked with Lionel Hampton's band at the Riviera Hotel twice.
Hmm.
Twice. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Now, how did you get to be the understudy with Leslie Uggams? Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, this was in New York,
Hmm.
and I was living in New York at the time. And I had a roommate, and my roommate was a dancer, and her name was Sandra McPherson. And
Sandra McPherson.
Sandra was already in the show. She was like in the chorus of the show of Hallelujah Baby.
Hmm.
And you know who else was in the chorus?
Who?
Garrett Morris.
Really?
Garrett Morris. He went on to do Saturday Night Live as a
Wow.
regular,
Amazing.
and now he's
Did
still
not
working. He's in that comedy series on TV now called Two Broke Girls.
Two Broke Girls. Wow. No, I didn't. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. I did
Oh
not know.
yeah, yeah. That's how I first met Garrett. We worked together in Hallelujah Baby. So I'll tell you how that happened. Sandy said, um, she said, you know what? They're looking to book a new understudy because the understudy they have now is going to leave, and that was uh oh, I can't wait. I'm having a senior moment. It'll come to me in a second.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
So anyway, I got hired for to be understudy for Leslie Uggams,
Gotcha.
and that was and I got to go on. I was the only one. I think they had two understudies prior to me, and I was the only understudy to ever go on, and I went on 5 times.
Wow. Amazing.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's incredible. Now let's fast forward a little bit, Miss Payne. I know that you were working with Lamont Dozier and a few of the other guys. Was it Lamont or Mr. Holland that brought you the song "Band of Gold"?
Whoa. I would say basically it was something that happened was all three of them really, because
Okay.
they all worked on it. They all were involved in it.
Yeah.
And but the guy that brought it to me and said and played it for me for the first time was a guy named Ronald Dunbar.
Yeah.
And Ronald Dunbar is actually listed as one of the writers, Ronald Dunbar and Edith Wayne, but
Hmm.
that was not true, because Eddie Holland and Brian and Lamont, they actually were the ones who were involved in writing that song.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And once you did that song, of course, your career just really took off. You started doing more pop things. You started appearing in TV shows, little specials. I saw something very, very interesting. You were on a show with Bobby Darin in
Yeah.
1973. You guys were singing "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," and I'm like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "You guys were like this close to each other." I'm like, "Is Frida going to kiss this guy, or what's going on?"
No, I thought he was going to kiss me. I was not about to be kissing him. Uh, no, he kept moving closer and
Right.
closer, and I was almost about to crack up. I was almost about to crack up. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like, and it was like one of those things where, is this, I guess I don't want, is he really going to kiss me or not?
Yeah, I was watching that. I'm like, I've never seen anything like this before. But he had a short career. He passed away like that same year. He was only like 37 or something like that.
He died that same year. And I did the show twice. I
Wow.
did the show twice.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see who this is calling me. It's my
Sure,
sister.
sure.
Wait, hold on.
Sure.
Hello, Sherry? Hi. I was doing an interview on, are you okay? Wait, let me call you. I'll call you right back. I did see that. I was like, what? And then Eleanor Garcia just texted me and said her father had a stroke. Yeah. Well, let me call you right back. I'm okay. Bye bye. That's my sister
Your wonderful
Sherry.
sister who sang, of course, one of the vocalists with the Supremes, right? That's your
Yeah,
younger
Sherry.
sister. You guys are like a year or two apart, right?
We're 2 years apart.
2 years
We're
apart.
two years
Yeah,
apart.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And of course, you have the other song, "Bring Home the Boys." Those two,
Bring the boys
"Bring the
home.
Boys Home." I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
That's
In the
okay.
book, though, but no, like I said, things were happening, and for your career. And I noticed in the early '80s, you had your own TV show called "Today's Black Woman."
Right. Today's
Tell
Black
me
Woman.
about that. Tell me about that. How did that whole
Well,
thing begin?
that came about because I was at the time I was being managed by Charles Huggins, who was married to Melba Moore,
Okay.
and so they, I guess they offered it to Melba at first, and then Melba decided that, well, maybe she she decided she wasn't quite ready to do a sit down talk show. So
Hmm.
Charles said, Freda, what about you? And so he broached the idea to the producers of the show, and they had a meeting, took a meeting with me. Let me see.
These pictures.
They took a meeting with me, and I was hired to do it. So I did that for 2 years.
Right, right. And you've been in some films too. I remember you were in The Clumps, Eddie Murphy, and you did another one called, was it Sprung?
Sprung, that was just a cameo. And then I did
Yeah.
the Book of Numbers.
Book of Numbers.
That was
Yeah.
with Raymond St. Jacques and Philip Michael Thomas and
Hmm.
D'Urville Martin.
Right.
And yeah, and Hope Clark.
Oh, Clark. Now,
Yeah.
in regard to jazz singers, or let's just talk about singing jazz. You did a fantastic job playing Ella Fitzgerald. I couldn't believe it. I was watching some footage of it. You had the bodysuit, the wig. I'm
Yeah.
like, Mr. Frida sounds just like Ella Fitzgerald. I mean, it was amazing. You really embodied her. Now, you got a chance to meet her briefly, didn't you? Did you guys get a chance to spend any time together or talk?
I got to meet Ella, I think it was like 1969, and it
Mm,
was in New York, and it
hmm.
was at the Empire State Building. They had a club at the time that was located in the first floor of the Empire State Building. It was called the Riverboat. I was invited by a very close friend of mine by the name of Faye Treadwell,
Okay.
and her husband was um, George Treadwell. And George had been married to Dinah Washington and Sarah Vaughan, and he was one of those kind of guys, and he was a manager, and they booked me as well. And she invited me to go to see Ella, and I said,
Mm,
"Oh God, I would love," because I'm like, she was my idol.
right.
And we went to see the show, and she said, "Well, I'm going back. Come on, let's go backstage," because she knew Ella, and she went backstage, and when I met Ella, it was like I felt like the hairs on the Holy Ghost spirit went through my body. I could just feel it. And I just sat, and then she and Ella kept, start talking. And then I just went and sat in a chair, and I didn't say a word.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that was
So,
my meeting with her, my first time. And then next time I saw her was here in LA, and she was at the Dorothy Chandler. This was one of those political things, I think. It was
yeah.
like a political thing with the NAACP, and she wasn't performing. She was just in the audience, and she was sitting right behind me, and I looked around. I said, "Oh my God, that's Ella."
Amazing,
Mm.
amazing. Now, Frida, today, what artists do you like, or who do you listen to? Like, if you're home and you just have a glass of wine and you're relaxing and you put something on, what artists do you listen to? Are there any jazz
Oh
singers,
wow.
artists that you like? Because, for instance, your generation, of course, you came up with Aretha, but some of the singers after you are like
Huh?
The Dee Dee Bridgewaters, the
You got
Diane Reeves.
stuck.
Can you hear me?
I
Are you?
love Diane Reeves.
Yeah, yeah.
I can hear you. You were breaking up a little bit.
Okay,
I
okay.
love Diane Reeves.
Right. What about
Hmm.
Dee Dee Bridgewater, Carmen Lundy, any of those ladies?
Well, guess what? Dee Dee Bridgewater and I have come along about the same time as well. I think, but I was a little before
Yeah,
her because I'm older.
yeah.
But I just did a duet with Dee Dee. We recorded a duet Capitol Records with a big
Wow.
band,
Wow.
and we did Moanin' and Doodlin'
Oh,
together.
wow. Art Blakey, yeah,
Yeah.
Moaning. I love that song. I know that you're also a fan of Horace Silver too. Now, did you ever get a chance to meet Miles Davis?
Yes, I got to meet Miles, and the first time I met him, it was in New York, and it was at the Apollo when I was with Quincy.
Okay.
And, and I was in my dressing room, and the stage manager yelled up to me, Freda Payne, Miles Davis is down here to see you. And I said, what? And I'm like, what the heck is going on? So
Right.
I went downstairs, and I went downstairs to the door. He was standing at the door, and he said, Quincy told me to sent me down here to check you out. Just like that. And he said, he said, you did a nice job. He was, Miles in his way. And
Right.
anybody that knows Miles, that knew him, he wasn't just like any ordinary guy. He was Miles. He had his own personality, the way he would talk
Right.
in that
Right.
kind of like that.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, "Hey, Quincy sent me down here to check you out," like that. And then
Wow.
I would run into him at different times. Like once I ran to him at a one of those Grammy at one of the Grammy shows, and he was sitting out in the lobby. This is at the Shrine Auditorium, and another time, yeah, I got to meet him. Yeah,
Wow. That's wonderful. Now, as I said, I was saying earlier, you came up with Aretha. Did you guys ever get a chance to do anything together, work together, or spend any time together talking about music? Because you guys came up exactly at the same time, which is amazing. You
yeah,
know?
because we were the same age. That's why that had a lot to do with it too, because we were all like same age as teenagers, and I had a friend. He was like my little buddy, my best friend buddy. We were in school together. His name was Donald Meadows, and Donald knew Aretha because he knew. I think he went to her father's church,
Yeah.
and he would go and tell Aretha because by that time, back then I was on TV doing the, talent contest and stuff, and Michigan Chronicle I would get write ups in the paper, so she had heard about me, so he
Yeah.
would tell her about me, and then he would come back and tell me about her. So it was like that.
Yeah.
Um, the last time I saw Aretha was 2000. I think it was 2018, I believe, in Detroit, and she did a concert downtown outdoors. It was an outdoor concert, and I mean, she was already sick, but she was okay. She was still okay. She was
Right.
still performing, and then she introduced me from the audience, and some other people. So that was the last time I laid eyes on her.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's great. Well, Frida, listen, I want to thank you so much for being with us today on Jazz Talk. You're a treasure. We love you. And I don't know what to say. I'm just so happy you did this interview. Hold on for a second. I'm about to close the show out. Well, you've heard it from Frida Payne. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.